Welcome everyone to today's episode of TC Eckstein Cafe Television. Today's special guest is the one and only great friend of mine, Miss Jacqueline Williams Hines. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you as always for having me.
Oh man, it's been difficult getting you back down here.
Oh man,
because I understand that. We both have our
Absolutely
schedules and stuff, but we got you. We got you, and we got you in April, which is Autism Awareness Month. And if any of you out there have seen the previous show we did, which was maybe a couple years back.
Yeah.
It was on autism awareness, an event that Jackie usually holds regarding this is Autism Speaks, the Awareness Day, and she's going to tell us all about her books and upcoming events and happenings and everything. But really tune in. We want you to tune in and stay tuned in and get educated more today on autism awareness. And we hope you got your blue on and you wear some blue for the month of April. Yeah, it's such an important issue. I know many of you out there, if you're not very much aware of all about autism, you probably at least heard something about it. But Jackie is the one that can tell you all about it. She can speak to you from experience. She will speak to you from experience. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Jackie now. So what has been going on?
Wow, you know what? So many things have been going on. And, I think the last time we were here, I was pursuing a master's and looking to become a board-certified behavior analyst. And that's kind of shifted a little bit. I ended up getting a master's as an autism specialist. And the reason for that, I'm still working as a behavior therapist, but my focus really started to expand. I love working with children one-to-one and seeing them develop and grow. But as I really started to look at the diagnosis and look at how that's impacting our community, I really wanted to do something that was much more expansive and impacting a larger number of children. Yeah. So one of the things that I undertook almost simultaneously as finishing my master's degree was I became a Lynn Fellow with UMass Medical, and that's learning of neurodevelopmental disabilities. So leadership and education of neurodevelopmental disabilities. I have so many acronyms going on in my head.
I can imagine, but neuro has to do with the neurological stuff.
So this is a year-long course that I'm taking up at UMass Medical.
So you're still in school again?
I'm still in school again. Wow. Yeah.
It never ends. I know.
Can't get away from it. But the importance of this is when I went in and I picked my topic like you would if you were doing a master's or a doctoral thesis, and mine was looking at the disparities suffered by African Americans. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about autism and people hear these rates being thrown out in April that autism affects 1 in 68 and 1 in 46 boys, and boys are affected 5 times as much. Well, one of the things that I found significant is that, for the median age of diagnosis is approximately, 18 to 24 months. African Americans are suffering an 18-month gap behind that. So we're not getting diagnosed early enough to get early intervention services. We're largely going into school with, not a lot of therapeutic services or a basis of behavioral supports. And what really, really blew my mind when I started really looking at the data in my fellowship, I found that African Americans are more apt to be diagnosed with ADHD, oppositional defiance disorders. A lot of diagnoses that really speak to more of a negative behavioral connotation. Yeah. And that's so significant because when we go into schools and, if you have all these diagnoses and maybe somewhere down the line we have an autism diagnosis, autism is largely not being addressed. We're seeing our children being in school and really just kind of being in situations where they're probably more apt to come in contact with in-house policing than therapeutic interventions, speech or occupational or behavioral therapy. And for me, that was like, wow. I mean, I was so taken aback when I found that out. I think there are things that we innately feel within our community,
Right.
But when you see it in black and white,
It's staggering.
It's staggering. It's jarring. It's like, wow, I didn't know.
Yeah.
So, I started looking at that and started really looking at, well, why aren't we getting diagnosed early enough? Because my perception initially was, well, I'm part of, I'm a state team member of Mass Act Early, which is the state's initiative, part of the CDC's National Know the Signs Act Early initiative. So I'm thinking, well, all I've got to do is get my little books and come in and do these seminars and let people know what diagnostic or developmental milestones should look like and what developmental delays should look like, and everybody's going to run and get a diagnosis. Well, in theory, that sounds good, but I found that we have a lot of cultural pushback. As African Americans, we don't talk about anything that looks like a developmental or a intellectual disability. We don't. We're still kind of that mindset of, we don't go to shrinks, we don't go to doctors like that. We take it to God, we pray on it. Or, he's just slow, or, boys develop slower, and all these things that we say amongst ourselves culturally.
There's also that fear that I know I had it when my son was growing up, that they're so quick to want to put him on a medication.
Absolutely.
And we're like very cautious of that, what do you want to put him on medication for? And to be honest, they diagnosed my son with ADHD when he was little, about 7, 8, 9, but I said, I'm not putting him on no med. And I talked to my mom, who was a head RN at Municipal Hospital. She was a director of nursing. And, I'd listen to my mom, of course,
Right.
and no, he doesn't need any medicine. He's just a normal boy, just, over, a little hyper, but... So I never put him on it, and trust me, he gave me a run for my money when he was little. He was busy, but I did have that fear.
Yeah.
And so I can relate to a lot of mothers, especially being an African American. I was very afraid that certain insurances they look at and say, well, let's just put them on this and this and that. And today is very scary too with that, because
Absolutely.
They're really like pushing meds on a lot of people.
True. And the thing is, I don't discount an accurate diagnosis of ADHD.
Yeah.
I think when we see an overdiagnosis or proliferation in certain areas or certain groups, and for me, when I went back and I looked at the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, the DSM-5,
DSM-5, yeah.
and what I found was that there's a lot of overlap when you're looking at presentations of autism spectrum in younger children and ADHD in, say, 7 or 8 year olds. So if we're missing that early intervention piece, or we're missing that early diagnostic piece, and we're getting diagnosed around 7 or 8, I think physicians are kind of leaning toward that ADHD presentation.
Yeah.
So, and then you do have cultural bias. I've spoke to a lot of physicians who said definitely cultural bias exists. When we look at a population who may be disproportionately larger than their peers because of diets or whatever, who, because of our posturing and just the way we move may be perceived as being more aggressive. There's a lot of bias, you know. So when I say that we want accurate diagnosis, initially your diagnosis should lead towards an ASD or an autism spectrum screening before you go to an ADHD.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
No, I can't seem to get it, and in my mind I'm ready. My time's made up, I gotta go. And it's alright if you want to see through your tomorrow, but right now I gotta go. If you want to stay, then you can be here with me, but I can't let go of this love, oh no, so easily. I said if you want to stay, then you can be here with me, but I can't let go of this love, oh no, so easily.
So I think that's where we're seeing kind of this over-representation in this population. And for me, the scary part is that when you're looking at a third grade, population of African-American males, third grade is so significant because that is a benchmark that so many things are determined by. Budgets are determined by that. You know, if you have a community who has underperforming educational systems, budgets for, prisons may be determined by by that. And so when you look at a educational system where you have children who are not meeting those educational benchmarks because they're not in special education and they're not getting the right supports, and maybe their behaviors aren't being looked at as how do we manage this behavior as opposed to how do we suppress the behavior, and being put in situations where maybe they're getting expelled, suspended, sent off to alternative schools. These are the children that are really falling through the cracks.
Right.
So
and to huge populations, schools that are maybe, overpopulated classrooms.
Yes.
You got one counselor. You usually have one counselor to the entire school. I mean, how can that one counselor possibly handle such a big caseload, a lot of times, And it just, to me, it's a lot of failure. And I'm not trying to put down the school systems. As we all know, public school systems today do not have adequate services.
No.
And they're not putting forth the money. Matter of fact, like you said, there's budget cuts on a lot of things. But that is one area they don't need to be budget cutting.
Yeah.
And, but can you kind of I'm curious myself. I mean, what would be a major identifier so people, because a lot of people don't really know the difference between autism and ADHD. They know the identifiers being that ADHD they just think of as just a kid that's really extra hyper. But autism, most people look at it as a kid that is probably advanced with numbers. And sometimes people look at it like it's a kind of a retardation, and it's not.
I think that unfortunately we still, there's still such a lack of knowledge, especially in our community. And I think unfortunately, most people's point of reference is still Rain Man. Or that autistic savant. They have these wonderful abilities, and the flip side of that is when you have someone, and that's really rare, but when you have someone who has such a narrow field of interest and they excel at that one thing, it's usually because they really can't generalize that interest across other things.
Right.
So you may have a child who knows everything there is to know about dinosaurs, but has no social skills and can't hold a conversation or can't, doesn't know how to interact with people.
Yeah.
So, and that's still very stereotypical. One of the best tools that I've found, as I said, I am a state team member of the CDC's Mass Act Early Initiative. And this booklet is probably one of the best tools that I found for young children. The Milestones Moments. This book actually gives you developmental benchmarks as well as developmental delays from birth all the way up to age 5.
Oh, good.
So, if you had a question, you could go in there and say, well, what should my child be doing at this age? So say 9 months, your child should be learning cognitive learning, thinking, problem solving, like watching the path of something as it falls, looking for something that he sees that you hid. So if you were playing with something and you put it behind your back, by that time your child should be looking for it. Playing peekaboo, putting things in their mouth, moving things smoothly from one hand to another, picking up things like Cheerios with a thumb and index finger. So those are some of the benchmarks, developmental benchmarks that they should be having. And then, let's see. I was just looking for some. Okay, so some of the delays that you want to see is they may not bear weight on legs with support. So if you're holding up a child and they're not supporting themselves, that could be a benchmark. Doesn't sit up with help. Doesn't babble, saying things like mama, dada, doesn't play any games involving back and forth play. So, I mean, that's just an example of month 9. But as I said, this book actually goes up to 5 years. So, even if you don't know what to look for, it'll give you a clue as to what's typical. Because sometimes when, especially if you have a family who may only have one child and has no other point of reference with, say, an older child. And they're thinking, well, he's a little slow, but, because we always say, oh, boys are slower,
Yeah, we do, especially like with potty training. That's I even hear myself saying that, well, he's going to take longer because, my son took longer. Everybody always said boys take longer to potty train. But you know what? There were, and when I had my own daycare, there were kids that potty trained before the girls that were same age. So it does happen.
It does happen.
There's a lot of myths out there.
The most important thing that you can do is kind of not realizing on friends and family, because we'll normalize everything. We'll make anything sound like, that's right. That's about right.
It's gonna rain. I feel it in my bones.
It's gonna rain. But if you really know what to ask your physician when you go in there and say, okay, he's about 1. Shouldn't he be doing this? Because another thing that I found is a lot of times. We're talking about a population in this area, in Greater Springfield. You may have families that are going to clinics. So maybe they're seeing a PCA the first visit, and maybe they're seeing a nurse practitioner the second visit, and maybe a doctor the third visit. We don't get a chance to establish those relationships with one person.
Right, unless there's a referral out.
Exactly. You know? And if that visit is 15 minutes long, most times you're not going to get a chance for that physician to really get to know your child. And a lot of times, I've heard it time and time again where parents will say, well, the doctor wasn't really that concerned. He said we'll check it on the next visit. So if he's not that concerned, maybe I shouldn't be that concerned.
Thank you. That's the thing. You gotta speak up. When I say it all the time, and even in regards to my own health, but when I was definitely with my kids and they were little, when I went to the doctors, I said, God, forgive me, doc, I know I'm a pain in the butt, but, I asked all the questions. I wanted to know everything, and you have to be that way. This is your child. Don't act like whatever insurance you got, don't act like anyone's doing you a favor. You go in there, it's your child, and you have the right to ask questions and find out everything going on. Don't worry about consuming this doctor's time. He can schedule you another visit to keep the conversation going or whatever, or he can schedule you a referral to someone else. But if you have concerns, you better voice them. There's no wrong question. And a lot of times as parents we think, well, it's probably dumb that I ask him, as he's going to think I'm a mom that doesn't know whatever. And maybe you don't know everything about being a mom. Nobody does. Guess what? The job doesn't come with a handwritten manual.
Let me tell you.
Ask your doctor, And
that's true. I think that we can be very intimidated by professionals. And I always say, when I talk to my son's educational team, or if it's a medical team, I always say I'm the team leader because I know him better than anybody else. I've put in more hours with this kid than anybody.
Exactly.
And go by your gut instinct. If you're not comfortable with your physician, don't be afraid to ask for a second opinion, or even say, if you're seeing someone in a group, look, we're not a good fit. Can I see someone else in your group?
Right.
I think that we kind of get pigeonholed to think, well, this is the physician they assigned me, so I have to stay with that person.
Yeah.
I think it's important that you have a good working relationship with your physician. They should not come in, you should not feel intimidated. You should
Not
be able
at
to
all.
ask any question.
I've seen it so
be
many
comfortable.
times too, working in the medical field in the past when I did nursing, and of course I've worked mostly all the fields, but I did work in peds, surgical surgery peds, matter of fact, and a lot of the parents just walked on in and signed the papers, and doctor says the kid has to have this surgery, so it's got to be done. And a lot of times, I knew from seeing it come through the office repeatedly, I was like, that kid probably doesn't need all that. This doctor is running up. You don't say nothing because you work there, but
Right.
in my head, I'm like, thank God I'm working here. I know if some doctor says, well, your son has to go in and get this and this and this done, I can reevaluate it, get a second opinion. I mean, a lot of times we just go along with the program, and you shouldn't do that. You should, if something, like you said, instinct, if something doesn't feel right, go the extra steps and research it out, because you're, like Jackie says, you're the one that knows your child. You're the one that lives with this child every day. You been dressing and feeding them and getting them up and ready and everything all these
Absolutely.
years, so you know your child, and stress it to the doctor again and again. And if they're not trying to hear what you have to say and you feel like you're not getting through to them, go elsewhere.
It's hard to understand something when it's not the same each time you see it. Learn more about autism at autismspeaks.org.
Hi, this is Jarvis Hart, Distance Public Service Announcer. Tomorrow is Autism Awareness Month for people with autism. I have autism since I was a little kid, and I want to help them be successful with autism, and helping go to college with kids with autism, and go to graduate for college and high school, and helping autism kids and autism adults be successful, just like me. And I graduate college and I graduate high school. And I will help people with autism be successful and be motivated and inspiration to all autism kids and adults in my life. And I'm a true role model, and I'm an advocate for autism people and autism kids. I'm a true role model. And light up blue. Tomorrow, Autism Awareness Month, April 2nd, and I'm a true role model. You can't do anything you want in your life for people with autism and kids and adults with autism. This is Jarvis Hart. Peace out.
Autism is a spectrum disorder.
Autism is currently a mystery.
Autism is 1 out of 166 children born today.
Is having heightened autism.
Autism is no one's fault.
Autism is not a disease.
Autism
is not the same for
having
each and every
difficulties in
Autism
communicating.
is patient.
Autism is getting closer to a solution, one step at a time. Autism is me.
You have that right, and it doesn't matter what kind of insurance you have. And that's the sad thing I've seen with a lot of girls that are on the Medicaid and stuff, or even if their child has some disabilities and they are on Medicare, they think because it's government funding their program that they have to just shut up and do whatever.
Well, I mean, it's that cultural stigma. We can't get past, and I think that really kind of lends itself into why we're seeing these diagnostic disparities. There's that cultural stigma of, one, I did something wrong. Because we're definitely not far removed from the crack baby syndrome. So there is that fear that people are going to think that I did something during my pregnancy that may have caused this. there's that sense of I don't want social, services all in my business. Even when there are times
that one's the real worst.
That is such a double-edged sword, because sometimes you really do need to avail yourself of services through their offices. Yes, historically, as a minority group, we have had a lot of problems dealing with social services in the negative. I think that we have to be mindful that they are there to support our families.
Yeah.
So take that initiative to call the office and say, look, I need help, whether it's someone to help translate for you, whether it's someone to help you fill out paperwork. We should not always look at them as they're coming through the door to take my kids.
Find a reason to clean my house and take everything out. Yeah.
So we should be availing ourselves of those services because they are there to help.
Yeah. A lot of people are not going to believe that, which is sad. And my sister's a supervisor at DSS. Vicky is, and she's seen the sadness of it. She's seen it all. But she's like, I told her, I said, I want to be, now that my kids are grown and gone, I've been considering becoming a foster mom. But she's like, TC, don't do it. Trust me, don't do it. And I'm like, no, I could open up my house. There's, and help out a kid. And she's like, don't do it. It's a lot to deal with, and, what if the child gives you all kinds of problems and then you have to deal with all that and you're getting older and, but I still am considering it. Yeah. But, she tells me the ins and outs of it. It's very hard to reach through to the clients that she has because many of them are already with a wall up before you even get through there, and then that makes the worker also get a wall up. Like, what is she hiding? What is she worried about?
Absolutely. My older son now is a social worker, and we talk about it a lot. When he went into the field, he really wanted to be able to connect with the children and work with them more hands-on. And he's like, Mom, I spend more time dealing with the parents. And I know that's frustrating for him. And unfortunately, that's just been the nature of our relationship as a people with social services. We don't see them until it's the worst case scenario. And I think that we have that same type of relationship with the medical community. We don't see our primary care physician unless we're going to the ER or there's something acutely wrong. So we don't build those relationships. And I think that's something that
and they get
has
mad
to
too.
happen.
They're like, how come you haven't been in to have a physical in so long, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I mean, it's right
there's
now.
A fear too. There's a big fear,
Of course there's a fear.
There's an old saying in the black community, you might go in and you ain't gonna check out.
Oh my God.
A lot of our people don't want to go in them hospitals. They're like, I heard you go in there, you come out without a leg or something.
But we joke about it. I'm actually reading a book now called Medical Apartheid. So we joke about it, but you know what? Within that comedy, there's a speck of truth in it.
There's a big speck of truth in it.
It's kind of hard for us to say this didn't just come out of thin air.
No, it has happened, and now there's this big uprise fear that there's what is this body part?
Organs.
The organs stealing and all that stuff. But there's been reports also. I forget where. I just saw something. I watch a lot of documentaries, and I saw one recently where there's a Martin Luther King hospital somewhere that everyone knows. If the ambulance is coming to get you, they run. They run. They actually run. I haven't
heard that one.
I think it's in South Carolina. The hospital shut down. It was called MK Hospital. But everybody said if you go to King Hospital, you live, if the ambulance is coming, they're going to take you to King Hospital. A lot of people have been known to skip or they'll be in the ambulance and they'll break out and run. They'll run to avoid it.
Now I'm going to have to
It's awful. I heard that and I said, that's awful, but no wonder these doctors in places are like, this person ain't been in to see a doctor in years.
It's so ironic for me that, as I said, when I started that journey doing my fellowship and looking at how do I combat these diagnostic disparities in our community? How do we bring the stakeholders to the table? Yeah. So I'm thinking it was just the parents. Then it was, okay, well, we have a medical community who has their own set of bias.